Hi everybody, welcome back. My name is Sue and I'm a scrap quilter who lives in southeastern Pennsylvania. So welcome to my channel. If you're new to me, I do almost all exclusively scrap quilts. So thanks for joining me. The first thing I want to talk about today, I just want to express my condolences for the passing of Donna Jordan, to her family, and what a quilting icon she was, and what an impact that she had on the quilting community. She's been steadfast through the years. She always delivered really good content. She always had good tips and information, so willing to share everything. And one of the things that I picked up from her that I do all the time now is when she cuts things of long lengths, she gets her long ruler out and she always puts a weight on the end of her ruler. And I do that now too all the time. If I have something long to cut and if it's several layers, and this is the weight that I use. I know she uses like a little barbell. This is a bigger one. This is a 5-pound weight. And I'll just put it at the very top of the ruler, because that's where I find if the ruler's going to slip a little bit, it's going to be at the very end of my cutting. And it would slip like just little bits at a time, like not a lot. But now that I use this, it really does make a difference. Those little things really do make a difference. So, and I pick up tips too from multiple sources. And so, really, my sympathies go out to her family. I was really sorry to hear about her passing. The other thing I want to talk about is this quilt that was hanging behind me here. I am so in love with this quilt. One of the viewers of my channel reached out and contacted me because she had this quilt top. She said she found in a junk shop, and she has it basted, and she started to put some hand quilting stitches in it, which, yay, she was trying to hand quilt it and not machine quilt it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with machine quilting, but these old vintage tops, I think, just make my heart so happy to see if they're hand quilted. She realized that she was not going to be able to finish this. She thought she was finding it was a little bit more of a struggle than she had anticipated, because some of the fabrics are thin and easy to get through, and some of the others, are not. They're not all the same weight, because back in the day, you used what you had. So she thought I would have much better success with hand quilting it. And Donna, if you're watching, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You have no idea how happy this quilt makes me. I'm just over the moon with it. It is so perfect. There's no wear on it. And this is all hand stitched. There's been no machine on this at all. Everything is done by hand, and it's just spectacular. I don't know about the age. I'm not an expert on dating quilts. She said she thought it might have been from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that could be. I just can't speak to that because I just don't have firsthand experience with dating fabrics, but they're in really good shape. I love too that there are pops of other colors in here. There's, a lot of reds in here. There are some greens and blues in here. I also really like that there's enough of these lighter colored ones that doesn't make the whole quilt look very, very, very dark and drab. These light ones really make a difference in brightening it up. So I really love that too. And some of these squares, now they finish at 1.5 inches. That's it. So they must have cut a 2-inch square to start with. These I'll measure at 1.5 finished. And like this one here is pieced. There's a seam here in the middle. And this one, yeah, this one is too right over here. There's just a lot. The more you look at it, the more things like that you see. Here's another one right up here that's pieced. And she took the time to match the lines, but there's a seam here. And I don't know if that was, you know, maybe part of the original clothing where there was just a seam that was matched there. I'm not sure. But, oh, I just love it. I just adore it. So this is going to be on my list very soon to do some hand quilting. Right now, I'm still hand quilting the Hunter Star. That's taking me a little bit longer than I had anticipated. The weather's been getting nice, and I've been, you know, a little sidetracked here and there. But I'm making good progress on it. And then the other one that I have to hand quilt is the Trip Around the World quilt that has the strong red diagonal lines through that. That's basted and that's ready to go. But I'm so excited about this one. This might jump in line before the Trip Around the World quilt. I'm really excited to work on this. So again, shout out to Donna, who contacted me and sent me this quilt top to finish. You know, the other thing, not only that I get to hand quilt it, but the fact that it is going to be finished and not just a top. Because I also think that when a top is in possession and gets passed down through the generations, not every generation is gonna realize what they have in this and how special this really is. And they also might not be quilters and have no interest in it. And so I kind of think things sort of get tossed, you know, that way, where the next generation just doesn't want it anymore. So again, I'm so happy to be able to finish this and make this a finished quilt, because I also think once it's finished and it is a proper quilt, I think it's more likely to be treasured, and I think it's more likely to just live a longer life. And even if people in the next generation don't really realize how nice this is, I think if it's a finished quilt, they're still more likely to want to keep it in the family. So again, thank you so much, Donna. I really do love it. So the other day I was going through my closet and I came across this quilt. It's a small one. It's a sampler. And this was made long ago. And I know that because back in the day I used to put labels on my quilts. And so here's the label for this quilt. And it says, Little House Sampler, all blocks sewn by Pam, who's my daughter behind the camera, for a school project, quilted by me. April 1999. She was in 4th grade, 10 years old. So I do remember helping her with these. I did all of the cutting because I felt, you know, rotary cutters are so sharp, as we all know. And just out of a precaution, out of safety, I did the cutting. I don't remember how we chose these blocks, although I'm sure I was just looking for something simple, but she did all the sewing on this quilt herself. So the reason I have this out today is because I noticed there were a couple of places where the fabric is opening up and coming apart. The seams are kind of failing a little bit. So I wanted to fix this. And so today I'm going to show you how I approach fixing an old quilt. So first of all, let me show you a couple of areas. And I don't even know how this happens because this is just a little quilt. We didn't actually use this quilt, so I don't know how things even opened up in the first place. But the center block here You can see it's coming open a little bit here. And where are the other blocks? There was one up here. Where was it over here? Oh, here. This one's coming up a little bit here. It's not bad. So I thought now's the time to fix it. And for this one too, because she did the sewing, I just took the backing of the quilt and I flipped it around to the front. And then she just sewed a seam on the front. So it's a little wonky in places, but that's okay. It's good for 10 years old. So today I want to sit down and show you how I'm going to fix this one. So here's a spot right here that's open a little bit. So I have a pin in it to mark it. So let me sit down and I'll sew that back up so you can see how I do this. Okay, so I'm going to start with just my quilting thread, which I use Coats and Clark hand quilting thread. It's a little bit stronger, and I always have this handy because I'm always quilting. So this is my go-to. And my needle is a quilting needle. You can use any needle that you feel comfortable with in your hand. So I have a little knot at the end of this. It's very tiny. So because I'm right-handed, I start on my right side and I work my way to the left. So I'm going to start, you see right about here is where it begins to open up. I'm going to start over here where it is still attached, because I feel if it opened up to here, I feel like this area is also weakened in here. So I put my needle in and I'm going to come up here in the seam. And I'm going to give my thread a tug. You can hear it pop through. And then I'm going to use the same stitch I use to put my binding on. I'm going to, I hope you can see this, I have my hand underneath here to hold this. I'm going to go in this gray, and I'm going to take a little bite out of it, and I come back up in the gray. I don't pull the thread all the way through each time, although you could. And then I'm going to bring my thread directly straight over to the blue. And I'm going to take a little bite into the blue and take a stitch. And back over to the gray part. And then back over to the blue part and take a little bite. And after I take just a few stitches, I will pull it through. I wouldn't recommend taking too many stitches at a time. Okay, let's see if I can do it this way without going underneath. Okay, so now I'm at the torn part. So if you feel comfortable pinning, you can. I always find the pin gets in my way, so I usually just try to hold it in place the best I can. And then I will, this is the part too, the blue part still has the seam folded under. The 1/4 inch seam is underneath. So I'm going to take that and place it on top of the gray. I try to push any extra little threads underneath as I go. So now I'll take a few more stitches. One in the gray, right across to the blue, take a stitch in the blue and in the gray, and I keep going over. So you can manipulate this to get it to close as you go along. I don't use any glues or any adhesives. I really try not to. because even if it says water soluble, I'm not going to wash this quilt very often. This is one of those quilts too that kind of has to stay in the family unless people decide to remove the label from it, because it's got my daughter's name on it. It was a school project, so of course I want to save that. So now I'm at the point at the end here of where it was actually open. So I'm going to take a few more stitches. I'm going to go past that part a little bit. Okay, so that's closed now. And now what I do, I say 99.9% of the time, is I will turn this whole thing around and I'm going to go back the other way and do that again. Because, again, like I just do what feels right for me. I feel like if this already came open once, I feel like there's not a good seam allowance for the gray part under here. And because it's already been open for some time before I even noticed it, the edges of this were kind of frayed. So I'm going to go back over this way now and do another set of stitches on top just to kind of give it a little extra strength and a little more stability. And also, because I'm doing this by hand and not machine, I know my hand stitches are not as close together as machine stitches are. Here you can see how far apart my stitches are here. So basically this area will have 2 sets of stitches over them, and it probably will look maybe a little bit rippled in here because of the hand stitches, but I would still rather have this repaired and look rippled than just leave it open. I also kind of think that going back over it again sort of helps to lock in those original stitches. I kind of feel the crisscrossing that I'm doing is also going to make it stronger in the end. So there's only a few spots on this quilt, and because this quilt, relatively speaking, is not very old. You know, I've worked on quilts much older than this one before. I think, you know, as soon as you see something like this happen, it's better to do it right away. You know, a stitch in time saves 9. This is exactly, you know, what they mean. Take 1 or 2 stitches now, and if you don't, if you let it go, you're going to have to take 9 later. So there it is. That's closed now. And then I'll show you how I do my ending knot here. I'll just give it like a little tug. I don't want to pull really, really tight because that's going to also give it more of a puckered look. So I put my needle very close to where my thread is coming up, and I just wrap my thread around it 2 times. I hold my hand close to the quilt until I get a loop. And then I put my needle in the middle of that loop into the quilt, straight up and down, and I give it a little tug. And now I have a knot. And now I will take a stitch, and I try to run my needle as far as I can. It's not a big needle, so it's not very far, because that leaves a longer tail underneath in the fabric. And then I pop it through. So now I know I'm not cutting close to the knot. The knot is over here, and this is where I'm cutting. And now I can cut the first one too. So that's how I would repair this quilt. So I'll probably go around and just make those other repairs too, as long as I have this out. And I think it needs a good wash also. There are a couple of places that the muslin fabric is starting to brown. And again, I don't know how things like that happen when a quilt is just folded and in a closet the whole time. Here's a little bit too, a little bit of staining on it. So, and here's another tiny little place that it's open. So the places that are open, it's not a lot. They're not big yet. So I do kind of want to take care of them now, you know, before anything else happens to it. And speaking of repairs, I bought this quilt out at the Ephrata fabric sale for $5 because it's in bad shape. This needs a lot of repairs. And I got this for my daughter because she has done some repairs also on an antique quilt, and she really liked the process of doing it. So she told me, you know, when I go out, if I see an old one that needs repairs, you know, maybe she'd be interested. So I sent her a picture of it, and then, you know, she asked me how much it was, and I said, 5. She's like, $5? Yeah. So this came home with us. We haven't done any repairs on it yet. We've both been really busy with other things. And for me, this is her project. It's not mine anyway. So how to approach all of the repairs on an old quilt like this. This one has a lot of issues. Some of the blocks, like the half square triangle blocks, here's a really good example here. This seam is split right down the middle, but all of the seams around the outside edge still look to be in good shape. So I think for this one, by the way too, this quilt is tied. It's not actually quilted, which actually I think is part of the problem. Some of these pop open. It just doesn't stabilize things enough. So, okay, getting back to this half square triangle, it would probably be best, the pink one is the one that has the seam pressed under. So it would probably be best to try to bring this over enough to the blue patch and to repair it that way. And just to do hand stitching down there. So, and that's just a personal choice too. When I fix quilts too, I don't cut any of the original fabric away. And my philosophy on that is I like to keep all of the original fabric with the quilt, all of it that I can, because I've seen a lot of videos in my day. I've watched a lot of programs, and I know there are quilt historians out there who try to date quilts and who are also interested in documenting the fabrics that were used at that time. And so, you know, my thinking is I'm keeping all of the original fabric with that quilt. The chances of one of my quilts getting into the hands of a historian are, you know, slim to none, but you never know. So, you know, just in my mind, I like to keep everything original to the quilt. In the end, you won't be able to see, you know, some of the original patches because they're too far gone, but I know that they're there. So now for something like this, this is ripped right on the edge. The seam is actually still intact. The seam is good, but the edge here is not. And this fabric is very, very, very thin. So if it were me, up here there's another place where it's coming apart. This whole quilt is kind of a mess. It really needs a lot of work. I would just get another patch and put it on top and connect it all the way around the outside seams. And again, that's the stitch that I use, the ladder stitch, or that's the stitch I do my binding with. And once everything's connected together, you can feel it's a lot more stable. Same down here with this blue one. There's just a big rip right in the middle of it. Such a pretty fabric though, that blue. Really, really pretty. This one here is not actually ripped yet, but this is a very coarse weave on this green. And so it would be a good idea to either reinforce this seam or just put a patch over this green. And to put a patch over, I measure the finished size of this. I don't have a ruler really handy, do I? Wait a minute, just wait a second. Okay. So I'll measure what the finished size is, and it's 3 inches. So I will cut a square 3.5 inches, and I will take it to the iron, and I will turn over the edges on at least one of the sides to get me started. The reason I don't want to do, for me, I don't want to turn over all 4 sides yet, is because I found in a lot of these antique quilts, their measurements are not really great. So if I turn over all 4 edges, it might not fit the space that I need it to fit. And especially when you start getting into half square triangles too. So I usually turn over one and I press it good and I start. And then when I go around, I turn it under as I go around. So again, with these, I would cut a 3.5 to start with. See, this one here is measuring a little bit more than 3. So, you know, and your seam allowances aren't going to be as crucial. They don't have to be exactly 1/4 of an inch because you're sewing this on by hand. So this is quite a job. There's a lot going on here. And it has this huge green piece that was applied to the edge of the quilt. There's a lot under here. My guess is that the binding really started to fail and that things were really worn at the edge. And somebody at a later date got this green and they just put it on just to kind of help protect the quilt from further damage. I really don't believe this was original to the quilt. But okay, so choosing fabrics too, because this is an antique. I do have some vintage fabrics, and so I know I'm not going to have the fabrics that I need. You know, there's no way I have these fabrics. So I'm gonna go more by like a vibe, or how does it feel? Is it really going to play well with the others? And it might be a vintage piece that I have that'll work, and it might not. It might be a new fabric. But I kind of want to keep the feel of the quilt the same. So what I did is, first of all, I went to my vintage fabrics and I got a lot of blues out to see what would go in that spot nicely. So these are all vintage pieces I have here. That one obviously not. I was just pulling stacks out. And this is way too white, way too teal. That one has about the same color. So I just kind of want to keep the whole feel of the quilt about the same. And this is why we have to collect fabric. This right here. You have to have all the fabric because you don't know what you're going to need for that spot here. This I thought was pretty too, but it's very white, like bright. You know, the white is much brighter than the others. So, so many choices. And of course, I don't have anything, you know, that will match. So what we found were these two that might look the best as far as the feel of everything surrounding it also. Not just the patch that needs to be replaced, but the feeling of everything else that's going on in the quilt. And so the white on this background is not as bright of a white, which is good. And the blue is a little bit more subdued too. It's not that bright, bright blue. And this one too, because of all the lines that are in it too, looked pretty good. I did try to see if I have anything blues and yellows, and I do, but none of them I didn't think would be a good fit. Just too bright. This was like a conversation print there. This one I really liked, but it's just much more saturated than all of the other fabrics around it, and so I thought that would probably stick out. And this one too was maybe a possibility because it's got some yellows in it. Here's another blue and yellow, but again, just much too saturated for that patch. And this one too, this really does not fit. It's a cute fabric, but it just does not belong in this quilt. And then this one too, I thought could work. So that's what you have to do. You just have to, you know, sort of audition pieces that you have and see, you know, see what the best fit is, and just know ahead of time it's never going to be a perfect match. But if you have any quilts that need repair, this is how I would go about doing it. So I'm sure there must be other ways too, but because I like to hand piece anyway, that's how I would do mine. Okay, so I also have an example of a quilt that has been worked on for years with repairs. This quilt is a trip around the world quilt, and it originated, well, my sister lived in Georgia at the time, and she went to an auction down there, and she bought it at an auction, and I'm not sure what she paid for it, but she had it for years. And at some point, I don't remember the circumstances. I mean, I know she moved back to Pennsylvania. And then I think when she moved then back to Georgia again, she didn't take everything back with her. So it came to live with me. And so my daughter fell in love with the quilt. It's been used and used and used. And so the fabrics in here were really falling apart a lot. Now this was hand quilted originally. And so she would bring it to me and she would say, you know, can you fix this? Can you repair it? And so I did that several times. And I know the last time I repaired it, I was just putting squares and appliquing them right on top of the existing fabric that was there. I tried the best I could to keep the same feel that was in here. Most of the fabrics I used there were newer fabrics. I didn't have very many vintage fabrics at that time, but there were some lines of fabric that were reproduction style prints. Some of them kind of look like they don't belong, but yet they kind of matched pretty good with the original fabrics. Not all of the chains were consistent even from the very beginning. So some of the chains you'll see, you know, are broken with the types of fabric that are in here now. And that is consistent with what the original quilt actually was. I think the original quilt maker was also running out of fabric. They used what they had to finish it. And so that's kind of the look that we kept also. So after I repaired this several years in a row, the back of the quilt also was starting to fail a lot. There were a lot of rips, very thin fabric, and then a lot more, like each year, more and more and more of the original blocks were just starting to shred. And so then Pam took it with her and she repaired a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. And so what she was doing then too, because the batting that's in here, you know, it wasn't like a nice thin sheet of batting that we buy today. It was the lumpy bumpy kind of batting that's in there. So, and a lot of that too was just bunched up or missing or very thin and shredded. So she would take a square of batting and then put that onto, and then put the new fabric on top of that, and applique around all of the edges and attach those squares. And then after all of that was done, then she went back and hand quilted again, on top of all of the squares. So that was a big job. She really spent a lot of time on that over the winter. And even now, we were just noticing when we laid it out, there are still some of the original squares on here. And we're still seeing that some more need to be replaced also. The binding has also been replaced on this one. Again, that's usually one of the first things that goes on the quilt is the edge. So the binding was put on, and some of the edges, I really think that I replaced the binding on this years ago, but you can see these squares here at the edge are not like a full 3-inch size square, and over here too they're a little bit shorter. And I really feel that's because the fabric was so deteriorated along the edge on the front and the back of the quilt that I just had to sacrifice some of that in order to put a fresh binding on. And then the back of the quilt too, this is the original part here. This has also been repaired in the spots that really needed it the most. And it really looks neat the way that it's been repaired. But it's just another way, you know, to keep a quilt alive and still be able to use it, because these old quilts are just so snuggly. There's just something just so comforting, you know, about the weight and the drape of it, and you know, the warmth of it. So this quilt has really lived a long life, and now because of these repairs, you know, it is still being used and loved a lot. So don't be afraid to take a chance and, you know, do little repairs on your quilts as need be. So I hope this was helpful, you know, for you guys to keep your quilts, you know, give them a long life also for your family. Okay, so that's going to wrap up my little mini lesson today on how to repair a quilt, whether it's vintage or not. In case any of your furry friends maybe have gotten to something that needs a little attention. I hope that I've given you the confidence now to give it a try and fix those quilts so you can keep using them and enjoying them. All right, everybody, I'll say goodbye and I'll see you next time. Happy quilting.